and welcome to the Two Gals and a Mic podcast. I'm your host, Sue Kerber, and on today's show, I'm sitting down with my good friend, Kendyl Hanks, who's an experienced appellate attorney advocating for clients throughout the country in state and federal forums. When she's not in the courtroom, Kendyl is likely writing her book, tending to her orchids, or chasing fish. Kendyl, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited that we have the chance to talk because you are a woman of many talents, of which I'd like to explore. But I mentioned in the introduction that you spend a large amount of time working as an attorney with clients and with trial teams in resolving high stakes business disputes. So, why don't we start with that? What drew you into law? Why did you decide to become a lawyer? And why did you go the route of appeals instead of a different avenue?
That's such a good question. And I think the answer is a little complicated because the easy answer is my dad was a lawyer and it was what I grew up around. It felt natural. The more complicated answer is I really wanted to be a writer. I don't know how old my parents would say I was when I had this desire, but it was made very clear to me very early on that I really needed to not depend on somebody else. I needed to be able to support myself. And so I went to law school. At my first law firm's wonderful law firm, I started out with a business litigation group and very quickly realized that I truly hate discovery, which is when the parties in litigation exchange information and they hold some back and then they fight over it. And it's miserable. And in big law life, it's a lot of the litigation experience. I was very fortunate to work at a firm with some really amazing women lawyers in particular who were appellate lawyers. And basically, I'm a litigator, but I do a lot more writing. I do a lot more strategic leadership in litigation teams. My conversations and arguments, well, really discussions are with judges as opposed to with witnesses or juries. And I don't do discovery. So I do a lot of writing. Every once in a while, they let me into a courtroom to argue.
Why did you choose to go into big law and not into private practice?
Big law is sort of the colloquial term that people use for really large law firms, of which mine is one. So big law is private practice. I'm a shareholder in a law firm called Greenberg Traurig. We're a global law firm. I don't know size wise what number we are, but we're one of the largest law firms in the world. We have offices all over Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia, in South America, in Mexico. I think we're at 2,800 lawyers now globally. So that's what I mean by big law.
Well, Kendyl, I've spent a lot of time with you, and no 2 days of yours are ever the same. In fact, you're frequently putting out fires. You are bringing people and ideas together, and you're often working with immediate deadlines. What's the most gratifying aspect of your vocation, and what have you found to be the most difficult?
The longer I've been practicing, the more I've had an opportunity to build teams that are specific to certain cases. So I have a national appellate docket, a lot of healthcare industry clients. Some of those cases are in Texas, a lot of them are in other places, and I'll have teams that I work with in the specific places where I have cases. I really enjoy putting teams together and finding the right people for the right clients. Everyone loves to think about bringing in business and developing clients. I mean, it's just like friendships. Some people get along, some people don't. Some people are good cultural fits, some people aren't. And it really took me a long time to see that from a place where I had the ability to curate teams in a way that worked for me as the person who was developing the client, as the lawyer and the relationship partner, but also in a way that worked for the client and for the people who are on the team. And I love that when the teams work really well together and there's a great dynamic, it's fun. I enjoy what I do a lot more.
How about balance?
When I was a young lawyer, balance was the holy grail, right? I mean, it was how do you find balance between your personal life and your professional life? How do you find balance between all of these other things? And one of my mentors when I was a younger lawyer and a beloved appellate lawyer in Texas, her name is Lynn Liberato. She told me once, And I've never forgotten this. She said, Kendall, you can do everything you want to do. You just can't do all of it at the same time. I think the concept of balance is sort of misleading. When you think of the physicality of balance is okay, I'm like not moving and I'm not going to fall over. I'm not too far ahead of my skis, whatever the metaphor is. I think real balance is about constant movement. I think real balance is about, adaptability. It's about flexibility. It's about being able to move from one thing to the next. It's about dexterity. But this concept that you have to have lots of balls in the air and you have to constantly keep them juggling, that's not really what it is. It's about knowing when to put the balls down and to do something else. It's about understanding that in professions like ours, like you mentioned about me, you've seen me sort of when we've been traveling, there's something has come up and there's been an emergency, and I've seen that with you too. It's about knowing that sometimes you have to be flexible and put things that are important to you aside in order to be there for other people. But it is just as much about being able to ask those people to understand when you need to do the same for yourself.
And I love that you brought up the idea of mentorship and seeking out mentorship throughout your career, because I was going to ask you, as you were talking about these skills of communication and building teams, sort of those softer skills, was it through mentorship that you were able to cultivate that? And how did you find those people?
With apologies for my language, I got lucky as fuck, Sue. I really did. I got so lucky. When I was a young lawyer, my first law firm when I graduated from law school was Haynes and Boone, and I worked with a couple of lawyers who were mentors to me, and I still talk to most of them. Lynn Liberata, who I mentioned, Nina Cortell, Mark Trachtenberg, who is a good friend still. He's in their Houston office. Ann Johnson, who was another appellate lawyer who was not a partner when I started out practicing, but she and I have kept in touch, and now she's running a law firm of her own, basically. I got very, very lucky. And what I realized quickly was when I found the people that I gravitated toward, I hung on for dear life. I'm going to do whatever I can to work with these people. I'm going to learn as much as I can from these people. And I also learned sometimes the hard way. Not everyone's a good mentor, even if they're good mentors to other people. And I learned very quickly that you don't need everyone to be a mentor. I stay in touch with those people who were very important in my early career. I try to be that person to others when I can. I don't try to be that person to everyone because I can't. And I don't expect everyone to be that person for me.
That's a really great perspective. Understanding that sometimes you can't be everything for everyone, and you just have to figure out where you fit in and what fits best for you. On that note, we've had a lot of conversations about navigating well in spaces and places that are traditionally male dominated. And I
Mm.
remember a conversation that we had actually right after we saw the Barbie movie, where you started to open up and talk about your experiences as a woman in the legal landscape. So I have to be honest, Kendall, I really didn't realize that practicing law was one of these areas that is so male dominated. But you've just talked about all these wonderful female mentors that you had in your career. So aside from the mentorship aspect, how have you been successful in really excelling in the arena?
At this point in my career, I'm doing very well. I have a busy practice and I feel very proud of that. But it hasn't always been like that. There have definitely been moments in my careers that were not like that at all, where I had to take a step back and recalibrate and move in a different direction. The trajectory is not a straight line. It's funny. I thought a lot about how you and I have had such similar experiences in such entirely different spheres. I mean, Coast Guard, veteran, fly fishing guide, right? A lawyer, and neither in military service nor a fly fishing guide. Just, I like to fish when I can. But the one thing that we share is that we both move professionally in very male dominated environments. I think that has been changing. I'm not going to say it has changed. I'm going to say it has been changing since I started practicing law a little over 2 decades ago. And I'm sure that's the same, at least from what I know on this, the demographics and statistics about women in military service. So when I got out of law school in 2001, more women were graduating from law school than men. Not a ton more, but just more than 50% of law school graduates were women. And at the time, we were all thinking, we're going to be running shit before you know it, right? It's just a matter of time. Well, that hasn't happened. That hasn't happened at all. There are incredible women leaders at big law firms, at small law firms, in government. We just saw one who unfortunately will not be in the White House, but would have been an amazing president, I thought. So we're seeing women at very high levels of the legal profession in all of its permutations, but they're still very underrepresented. They certainly are not staying in the legal practice at a level that is consistent with the number of women who are going. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. Sometimes people start practicing law and it just isn't for them and they decide to leave. That's true of men and women. It is more true of women. It is also more true of lawyers of color, minorities. And I don't think it's because they're not qualified. I think it's because it is a profession that is structured by for men. And anything that doesn't sort of fit this concept of what a lawyer looks like, talks like, acts like, what their life is like is something different. And it has been harder, I think, for women to succeed in that environment because you literally have to sort of change the notion of what it looks like to be a lawyer, what it feels like to be a lawyer, what it sounds like to be a lawyer. I think it is changing, but not as quickly as I would like. And it's one of the reasons why by the time you get to my level as a partner or shareholder, whatever the title is, but someone who has equity as like a leader in the company or in the law firm, our numbers are very low relative to the numbers of us who graduated.
So, how have you personally navigated that landscape?
I would put it more active voice because it's sort of a constant thing. How am I navigating it? I'm navigating it the most authentic way I can. I spent a lot of years trying to be, I don't think I ever actually was, but trying to be somebody else's vision of what I should be as a lawyer. So I spent a lot of time like trying to fit myself into a mold of what I believed I had to be in order to be a lawyer. I don't want to get too much into the details about it, other than to say, I don't think I really started enjoying practicing law until I started focusing more on what made me happy and how I was my best version of a lawyer instead of trying to be someone else's best version of a lawyer. It takes an act of Congress to get me into a pair of heels now. And I used to commute in heels in New York City when I practiced. And I mean, the notion of walking into a law office without wearing a skirt suit and perfectly put together and my hair done was blasphemous. I mean, I never would have considered doing it. Now I write most of my briefs in front of a huge gaming monitor in my home office in Lululemons. And I'm doing the best work of my career.
For the record, I have seen you in a pair of heels in New York City, as a matter of fact.
Well, I wasn't practicing law though.
You were not. You were not. You know, you're talking about being happy and really moving into this authentic space, which you have created by co-founding an online forum that not only celebrates and promotes women in the legal profession, but it also overtly calls out sexist behavior. Kendall, what prompted you to create this? And what response have you received since it started?
Lady Lawyer Diaries started out as a hashtag for which I take no credit. A law professor up in Pennsylvania, who's also a very good friend of mine, Ellie Margolis, was sort of, I think, the original coiner of this hashtag on Twitter called Lady Lawyer Diaries. I think it was probably about 2017, maybe the beginning of the Me Too movement. And I don't know if you remember, there were some media reports about allegations of harassment against a judge. It was a very well respected federal appellate judge for whom a lot of very well respected women lawyers had clerked. And the stories started coming out, and very much like the military. So, this is some of the same issues we deal with in the military. You know how in the military for MST victims, the chain of command was a huge problem. So if there was someone who experienced sexual trauma or harassment or inappropriate behavior, they had nowhere to go. They had no one to ask for help because of the chain of command. It's the same in the judiciary. And so as the Me Too movement was picking up steam, there are these incredibly brave women who spoke up about their experiences with one judge in particular, but not just one judge within the judiciary, experiences clerks where they had been subjected to harassment, to sexual assault, to tremendously hostile environments from people who they were meant to have been able to trust. So, Lady Lawyer Diaries was much bigger than this one particular issue, but it sort of grew in that context. And so there are a group of women from around the country in different kinds of practices who we came together and we started this handle on Twitter where we took turns sort of curating it and posting stuff and inviting information from other women lawyers or women in the legal profession to share their stories so that they could share them anonymously because they had nowhere to go. And they were afraid of retribution. They were afraid of getting in trouble with their employer. And so they would tell us their stories privately. And then when we had their permission, we would post their stories publicly, but anonymously. So it protected their identities, but gave them a voice. The one thing I hated about leaving Twitter is all those stories are still on that handle. Well, we're in the process of migrating those over to Blue Sky. We kind of went a little fallow for a year or two because Twitter just became inhospitable to those sorts of communications, and the algorithm made it impossible. We just didn't want to participate in that environment. But now there's a lot of movement toward building that community back up on Blue Sky. So we're hoping to be able to develop that same method of both celebrating women in the legal profession and not just lawyers. Women in the legal profession is much broader than just lawyers. Celebrating them, creating a community to have these conversations, but also creating a platform for their voices to be heard. And I fear going forward, it's going to be a time where women need to be heard.
So you mentioned navigating over to Blue Sky, and I want to make sure that we have the handle correct. It's Lady Lawyer Diaries on Blue Sky.
On Blue Sky, it's at Lady Lawyer Diary, singular. It's easy to find us. If you look for Lady Lawyer Diary, you'll find us on Blue Sky.
Don't worry, listeners. I'll put the information in the show notes so that you've got it. So I want to go back to this conversation that we were just having about authenticity. Recently, Kendyl, you and I were in New Orleans to celebrate. We were to celebrate our 50th birthdays with a couple of fun things. We did some saltwater fly fishing and a little Taylor Swift concert.
A lot of Taylor Swift.
And after that trip, after I got back to Montana, I had the opportunity to give a talk and focused on what it looks like when fearlessness and authenticity intersect. And I talked about this moment when Kendyl and I were out saltwater fly fishing, and I was on a fish, and I was fighting this fish and wasn't sure that I had the strength to be able to get the fish in the boat. And there's a couple of very poignant moments here. I think after about 5 minutes of fighting this fish, I very authentically started screaming to the world and anyone that would listen to me, I'm fearless. I'm 50.
No. So I'm watching you fight this fish. And this is a massive fish. It's an amberjack. And it looks like a shark. You are on the front of the boat, up on top. So you're like way above the water. And I'm just like, I don't know how she's going to do this. And your arms are shaking a bit and all of it. And I'm right behind you because I'm worried that you're going to go one way or another. So I sort of had my arms on one side or the other, just in case you went one direction or the other. And all of a sudden you're pulling to your right and the rod is just almost bent in half because you're trying to get the fish close enough to the boat to get it into the net. So all of a sudden I hear you say, I'm 50 and I'm fearless. That's what it was like standing behind you. It was the most brilliant thing I've ever heard. I couldn't stop laughing, but then again, I was afraid you were going to fall off the boat. So I was trying not to laugh, but it was just such an exceptional moment.
Well, and there were so many elements to that because as you just described, here you are and you have my back. So here is a friend who is ready to hold on to me,
Well, what I
strength.
literally was holding on to you. I
Yes.
literally was holding on to you at one point because your arms were shaking the size of this fish and the length of time that you fought it. But she's not going to let go of the rod, right? There's no way she's letting go of this rod. And so I'm just going to hold on to her because I don't want her to go into the ocean.
I thought about all of that. I thought about bringing that fish in. I thought about how you had me. I thought about being authentic and screaming and fearless and just the refusal to let that fish go and the determination, just all of it, and how that entire trip really embodied the elements of authenticity and fearlessness. So I'm wondering, what does this
Mhm.
look like for you? And how, as women, can we move past barriers, whether they're self imposed or culturally or environmentally created, to be authentic and to be fearless?
This is a conversation that could be its own long episode. And I want to say the important things, but also say them with the right context because I don't want to give anyone the wrong impression. I'll start with this. The thing that has been most important to my ability to continue doing what I do, to love what I do, is authenticity. Now, that comes with a lot of asterisks. Hypothetically speaking, this is not a me example, but hypothetically speaking, if you are both a nudist and a lawyer, you can't be both of those things at the same time all the time. There are places and times for both, but they don't necessarily happen at the same time. So that's like a really stark, absurd example, but there's a lot of truth in that. I think it is very, very important to strive for authenticity in your practice of law, in the way you interact with people, in the way you build teams, in the way you fill roles in teams, because being authentic, or at least doing things that are authentic and not doing things that aren't, not being someone you're not, that will naturally bring you to where you need to be with the people you need to be with. It will sort of create a current of its own that will eventually help you be in the places that are consistent with whatever it is about you that's authentic that you let play out in your professional environment and personal relationships. The trick is this, and this goes back to that advice I got as a young lawyer: you can be everything you want to be, you just can't be all of it at the same time. You can't do all of it at the same time. It's the same concept. Pick battles. There are things about my personality that I care about, not just about my personality, but my values that I care very much about. But those things don't need to be part of the conversation all the time. So if I'm in a deposition, which doesn't happen very often, or if I'm in a court argument, we're not having a conversation about me. It's not about me. I'm not going to be talking about those things that are very important. But I'm also not going to do or say things that are inconsistent with me and my values. I am not going to be someone else to make someone else comfortable. I will say the longer I have practiced, I mean, I have business of my own, and that comes with certain kinds of flexibility. I am more authentic now than I was 10 years ago. I am freer with being myself. I give myself permission to do that more than I did 10 years ago. And I'm a much happier person for it. I can't say everyone else is, but that's okay. I mean, that's part of being authentic, right? You really have to embrace the inexorable truth that not everyone is going to like you. Not everyone is going to like you. And that is okay. Now, what I seek out are the people in the communities and the clients, really, where I can be the authentic person that I'm happiest with. And that has made a tremendous difference in my professional life.
I think that goes back to something that you said earlier in our conversation even as you are seeking out mentors and as you are now providing mentorship, you can't be everything for everyone. You just can't. And that's the beauty of diversity, being able to find those people who fill whatever need it is that you're looking for.
And who make us grow, who
Mhm.
make us grow. Diversity to me is so important. It goes back to this idea that lawyers look, act, seem like a certain kind of mold. I mean, that's a really bad thing for clients. It's a bad thing for courts because that's not the way the system functions. The system interacts on a daily basis with such a dramatic scope of diversity of economic backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, race, gender, all of these things. And that's to me that like interacting with people, deliberately interacting with people as much as I can and always needing to do a better job of it is a big part of not just being a mentor, but actively being mentored. As you know, I'm 50 and I still seek out mentorship from people who have different experiences and perspectives for me because I don't ever want to stop growing in that way.
You also serve on the board of trustees for Project Healing Waters. It's a veteran organization that uses elements of fly fishing to help veterans heal. Kendyl, how did you get involved with Project Healing Waters, and why is this work so important to you? Because it's vastly different than being a lawyer, I would think.
So it is vastly different, but also in some ways not. So I think I've sent it to you before. There's an essay that I wrote that the American Bar Association published in one of their journals called Fly Fishing Lessons for Litigators. Actually, the longer I practice, the more I find that the things that I love about fly fishing are the parts that I love about practicing law or being an appellate lawyer in particular. I had been on the board of governors of the American Bar Association, and this was more than a decade ago. As you can imagine, both practicing law and doing board work within the legal profession was so much. It was just all law all the time, all lawyers all the time. And it was a wonderful experience, but I was devoting too much of my existence to lawyer stuff. So I stepped back from leadership in the American Bar Association and was looking for something different. And I talk about this in the essay. I wanted to do something that matched my personal interests and skills and wasn't just because I was a lawyer. On Twitter, this Lady Lawyer Diaries community, Elizabeth Trineri, who is a lawyer in, I believe, North Carolina, is on the board of Project Healing Waters. And she reached out and she said she had seen my thread. This was the thread that prompted the essay called Fly Fishing Lessons, which just sort of thoughts about things you can take from fly fishing that have meaning in other contexts. She had followed that and we had talked a couple times. She's like, I'd really like to introduce you to this organization. And I was just beside myself with excitement because I have a lot of veterans in my family. I did not serve in the military, but a ton of my family has. And this was a way for me to use my skills professionally to give back to a community that I cared about using a vehicle that I really enjoy, which is fly fishing skills.
So, as a board member, what's been the most gratifying part of the experience? And what would you love to see come to fruition during the remainder of your tenure?
First of all, meeting you was a tremendous experience for me because I think that I've met a ton of veterans, really amazing people. The volunteers in this organization are incredible. You and I have developed a friendship just based on shared interests and priorities. And that has been a tremendous experience for me, particularly because one of the things you and I both care about and have put into action is this Women on the Fly within Project Healing Waters, focused on addressing the needs of women in service and women veterans. Because in male dominated spheres, we spend a lot of time sort of like having to act like one of the guys, got to be one of the guys. We can all do that. We're good at that. And we have to do it. But one of the things we've learned about creating an environment that really meets the needs of women, particularly women veterans, is curating spaces for them where they can be heard, where they feel safe, where they can build community and they don't feel like they have to be and act like one of the guys all the time. They can do that. They can totally do that. We just don't want them to feel like they have to do it all the time. So we started this Women on the Fly group. We have an admiral, with us who's amazing, and I love her. She's now on the board. And we have women from different backgrounds, most of whom have served in the military, some of whom have not, including myself, who have very different perspectives, but all are focused on one thing, which is doing a better job of meeting the needs of the women who have served our country and who have given so much. Some are in active service, and a lot of them are veterans. And I love that. I love that we're doing that.
And I love that it creates space for women to be authentic, which is what this whole conversation has been
Exactly.
about, right?
Exactly.
So, Kendall, you've achieved so much along the way, and you've helped and continue to help so many people. If there's one thing that you wish that you'd known, maybe a nugget or two that you
Oh,
wish
yeah.
that you could go back and tell a younger version of yourself, what would that be?
As a matter of principle, I don't believe in regret. And the reason for that is I don't think anything useful comes of it. Now, that being said, thinking that and feeling that are two different things. I think I would have told my younger self not to get married when I did. And it's not that I regret being married or getting married. I don't. That's the funny thing. I'm divorced now. I've been divorced for a long time. And it's that I think if I had waited longer, if I had given myself time to be myself, to learn to be myself, I don't know if my choices would have been different or not, but it wouldn't have been the way it was, if that makes sense. So again, it's not that I regret any of it. It's that I think I would have made more educated decisions, more thoughtful decisions.
Do you think you would have found authenticity sooner?
I don't. And the reason for that is that I think the path to authenticity is not a simple one, and it's not a painless one. There are a lot of hard lessons on the road to getting to a place where you're like, this is the person I'm supposed to be. I don't think that I could have gotten there any sooner. And it's one of the reasons why when I talk to younger, particularly women lawyers, it doesn't feel fair of me to say, be your authentic self. It's one of the reasons I'm so careful to say, but you can't be your authentic self all the time. You really do have to be careful about how much you share, with whom you share it, in what context. And the longer you practice, when you have clients of your own, when you have a practice of your own, you're established, you know a reputation in your field, you can be a little bit more authentic. When you're, a brand new associate at a big law firm, don't be the one dancing on a bar. I don't dance on bars now, but you got to be a little bit more careful when you start out. So no, I don't think that I could have been the person and lawyer I am now 20 years ago, which is frustrating, right? Because I would have been a lot happier. Now, I do think I could have made choices that led me to a more authentic personal and professional life. I think I could have made choices that could have gotten me there sooner.
So, what would you say the most profound thing is that you have learned about yourself along the way? Is there anything that stands out or has surprised
Mm.
you?
Yeah, there are things that surprise me all the time. The difference now is that when something about myself surprises me, I kind of try to lean into it and I try to sort of explore it. I try not to indulge the feeling of guilt about, oh, I shouldn't want to do that. I shouldn't feel that way. I shouldn't be that way. This isn't good, right? I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna check that out. Now, one thing I will say, there is a tremendous amount of privilege in my life in having those options because I don't have kids, which is something, again, I don't believe in regret, and it does make me sad sometimes. So for me to say that, it's easy for me to say that about my experience when I'm talking to other women and they're like, easy for you to say. I work, and then I come home and then I've got to do all this other stuff. And so I think I'm reluctant to talk about exploring the things in my life that I'm now free to explore because I think I have a tremendous amount of freedom and flexibility and privilege that a lot of women in the profession don't have. And I feel very aware of that.
Well, that leads into this next question. What's next for you? I mean, I mentioned in the introduction that you're writing this book. Is that it? Or
Oh
is there
God.
something else that's on your bucket list?
I'm going to continue to spend time in Colorado when I can, and fly fish when I can in the summers, continue work with Project Healing Waters as much as I can, continue working with you and the Women in the Fly Project as much as I can. For about 3 or 4 years, maybe even longer, I've been working on a book about, so there's some family stories about my mother's side of the family. And honestly, I don't think I really believed them. Some of them were so like crazy, these wild stories that just didn't seem real to me. And then during COVID, I started reading some of the things that I had about the family and doing some research. So my great grandfather was a congressman from Utah, and my mother, who taught me how to fly fish, her father was raised on a ranch in southern Idaho, which is now Niagara Springs. It's a state park down there on the Snake River. And I had heard all these stories that just seemed fantastical. And I started researching it. And particularly because my great grandfather was a congressman, there are actually things that were written at the time that confirm some of these crazy ass stories that I was hearing from my family. And with the onset of so many things becoming digitally archived, old newspaper articles and things like that, I was able to confirm some of these stories. And then I just got really excited about it. A lot of the things that I want to write about happened during World War II, in the early part of the war. My mother's father, my grandfather, was a C-47 pilot in Northern Africa and Sicily and Italy and in Yugoslavia. Those were all Allied missions, and a lot of the records are not here in the United States. They're over in Europe. So I've had a World War II researcher for the last 3 years who's been helping me pull together war records about some of these missions. And the stories are bananas, and I can't wait to write about it. And so I have a long outline, and I've been fleshing it out as I go. But the thing that I love most about it, that I really love most about it, and I didn't realize it until I started doing it. Like I said at the beginning of our conversation, when I was little, I always wanted to be a writer. And I do love writing. I do love writing. There's a lot of tremendously talented fiction writers, and I don't think I have the brain for that. But what the last 20 years has taught me is that one thing I'm really good at is taking a record from what happens before. In appellate world, that's the trial record, and building a narrative based on that. In appellate practice, I don't get to go past the record, right? I mean, I'm stuck with what the record is. Those are the arguments that we have available to us. We're limited in the narrative that we can build for the appellate court. But in historical, so it would really be sort of historical fiction, right? So pieces, very true stories. That's what I'm trying to nail down, is the real facts of what happened. Some of it was World War I, some of it was World War II. And I'm pulling all that together and then building the narrative on that. And I'm like, that's what I do professionally, except in court, I don't get to make shit up. When I'm writing the books, like the pieces that I don't have, I can fill in. I don't have to be perfectly accurate. I can actually build a story based on what I knew, what I heard about these people growing up. It feels very full circle. Using my skills as an appellate lawyer to do the thing that I always wanted to do when I was a little girl.
I just love that so much. It gives me absolute chills. So, what legacy, Kendall, do you want to leave?
I don't know, Sue. Legacy means so many different things to so many different people. I would hope at the end of my life that I'm known to have been a kind person and maybe a sense of humor. If someone I think is really awesome and smart and cool says that's someone I want to have a drink with, sit down and have a glass of wine with, that will make me happy.
Well, I love to close things out with asking for words of wisdom, and you certainly have a lot of wisdom. What advice or hard earned lessons would you offer to listeners who know that they have untapped potential but have held themselves back from unlocking it?
It is more important to not be inauthentic than it is to be authentic, but it is very important to be authentic. I think just the act of authenticity will bring you organically to where you're meant to be. I really believe that. And the more time you spend trying to make other people happy and trying to be someone you're not, the more you are driving yourself into a place you're not meant to be and you will not be happy. And I say that as the generic you, and I say that based on my own experience. And I know not everyone has those options and those choices, but I think authenticity is the most organically important thing any of us can do for ourselves. And then the only other wisdom I think I can give is that it is so important to trust people, but it is also really important to know who to trust. And you need to find your people, right? I know I can call you with anything, anytime, and that is a gift. It's a gift. I want to be that person for my closest friends. And the greatest wish I have for anyone is that they find that in their lives, whether that's with a partner, a friend, family, children, coworkers, whatever it is. Find your people.
Well, thank you, Kendall, for sharing your insights and your knowledge with us today. Being authentic, fearless, and 50 can be a challenge, but honestly, you make it look seamless. And you are so generous with your time and talents in helping others get there too. And
Well,
listeners,
thank you.
thank you for tuning in. We only have 3 more episodes until we wrap this project up. So be sure to catch up on the ones that you've missed and stay tuned for the last few extraordinary ladies who will round out the Two Gals and a Mic series. I'll see you next time.